Hello, everybody. It's good to see you again. You know, a lot of the little historical tidbits and stories I like to tell, they're not necessarily things that were told to me directly. Lots of times I was just eavesdropping. That was one of my favorite pastimes growing up. I loved to be around my elders and see what information I could pick up. And if I could make myself quiet and out of the way, I usually could get a little something out of it. But I never stopped enjoying doing that, and I still do. One of my Aunt Golden's favorite people to visit with was Mr. Zeb Hudgens. They had grown up together in Hallieford, along with my grandmother Twig, my Aunt Golden's sister. And I think he was a little bit younger, but he had a watch repair and jewelry repair store at Matthews Courthouse. And sometimes when he wasn't busy, he'd come by the shop, and he and my Aunt Golden would sit toe to toe, and they'd visit. And they'd reminisce. Mr. Zeb was father of Wayne Hudgens, and Wayne's wife Peggy still lives at Hallieford. And my Aunt Golden really just thought the world of him, and they would sit there and just talk and talk. A lot of what they talked about revolved around the water and just how important the water was to them growing up. We think about our cars and highways now, but their highway was truly the water, and it was like that for a lot of Matthews people, not just the fishermen, but other people. Life just, it was so important, just the seafood business, but commerce. Callis's Wharf was, at the turn of the century, was in full sway as a center of commerce, with ships coming from Baltimore, things being bought and sold. If you ordered something, that's where it was delivered if you lived in that area and you used that dock. So one of his favorite stories to tell was about a Christmas time when he wanted a bicycle. And it wasn't a secret. His parents had promised him the bike, and he knew it was coming, and he was so anxious for it. And his father had checked, and they could look out and see if ships were coming and going towards Gwynn's Island, but no bicycle. So actually Christmas Day came, and that morning his dad told him, he just knew he was so disappointed. He took him in. He said, "Let's go in the skiff, and let's just go over there. Maybe somebody's there, and we can look around, and maybe it's there." And Zeb said they had to chip away at some ice to get out of the creek that morning and to get across Milford Haven to get to Callis's Wharf. And lo and behold, somebody was there, and the bike was there, and they got it all back in the skiff, and they got back to Hallieford. And I think maybe he had a little accident with his bike later that same day, but he made it a very amusing story. But I just was always in wonder about what they had to go through to get something. You just didn't do anything spur of the moment, and it took a lot of effort and patience to work through. Going to church. My aunt and Golden and my grandmother Twig, they went with their parents to church at the church at Hudgens. Now, they were 12 years younger, my Aunt Golden was, than the youngest of her 4 brothers. There were 6 children altogether, but by the time they came along, the boys had all grown up and gone to work or even gotten married because they were so much older. But so it was my great-grandparents and my Aunt Golden and my grandmother, and they would go by boat to Cricket Hill, meet up with other people, and then go up from Cricket Hill to Hudgens to go to church. The roads were so bad in those days, that was just the best way to get there. Golden and my grandmother never went to Matthews Courthouse until Golden was 11, so that means my grandmother was probably about 9 and a half. And she used to describe exactly the dress. They had matching dresses, white lawn dresses trimmed in lace, and Golden's had a blue satin sash, and my grandmother Twig always went for pink, and hers was pink. And the horses didn't seem to be feeling very well that day when they set off, and she was worried the whole trip about the horses because it was so long to go from Hallieford to Matthews Courthouse, but how exciting it was. They had several stores in Hallieford. We're probably familiar with Hallieford store where the post office is now, but if you turn left there and went down towards the water, which is where they lived, I think there were 2 more stores going down that direction, and I'm not real clear on that, but I'm fairly certain. And one of them was owned by a relative, And my great uncle Jimmy Golden and my grandmother's older brother, when he was a little boy, he used to like to go out there and mess around, and they indulged him. And most general stores back then had a back room, and that's where the big barrels would be kept. The big barrels that came in on those ships to places like Callis's Wharf. And he loved the one that had molasses in it, and he liked to turn the spigot and get a little bit maybe on his finger or on a cracker and have a treat. Well, this was late on Saturday afternoon, and he did that. And not too long after that, they closed up and went home, and I guess he was sent home or accompanied home. And when they went back in on Monday morning, because they were closed on Sunday, he hadn't turned the spigot all the way off, and there was 2 inches of molasses in the floor of that back room. That's a bad way to start a Monday. But when he was up in his 80s, they were still teasing him about that, and it must have really been a bad time. Another little funny story about it, the other store that was up at Hallieford, and tells you something about commerce and the way things are. If we order something now from Amazon or anywhere else and we don't like it, we can return it. It's a process, but it's not difficult. But whoever ran that store ordered some chamber pots from Baltimore. And the intention was to order 12 chamber pots. But when they went into the store, and the store looked a whole lot like the interior of Southwind at the courthouse, which used to be Mr. Lee Miles' store, all those shelves all the way around, sort of in a U shape. The top 2 shelves all the way around the store were full of chamber pots, and they weren't even all on display. And instead of getting 12, they'd been sent 12 dozen, and it was just ridiculous. And I'm impressed that they could pay for 12 dozen chamber pots. But they used to laugh about it and say 30 years later, when the store went out of business, probably maybe during the Depression or something, I don't know, that there were still many, many chamber pots, that there was no shortage of supply. So I always thought that was pretty funny. Golden's best friend growing up was a lady named Pearl Sadler. And she used to tell a very specific story about when they were 7. So that would have been about 1902. She considered Pearl to be the most affluent, from the most affluent family that she was aware of that lived at Hallieford at the time. Pearl's father was a successful sea captain, Captain Sadler, and I think she was an only child. And her mother was a lovely housekeeper, and my Aunt Golden said if she went there to play, they were very particular because everything was always very pretty and very nicely maintained. And when Pearl's daddy came home from sea, the world changed, and it still revolved around Pearl, but it revolved around him in particular. And he came home this one particular time, and one of his sailors had passed away at sea who had a talking bird. And he didn't have any relatives. They didn't know what to do with the bird. So Captain Sadler decided to bring the bird home as an amusement for his little daughter, Pearl. And it was in a nice cage. And so I don't think Mrs. Sadler was too thrilled about it, but it was installed in the dining room. So thinking about this whole thing about going to church and going by boat and all that, I just can't imagine. But they apparently did all that, and the minister would frequently come back to their house for lunch because, they could afford it for one thing, and she always entertained beautifully. And my Aunt Golden always told the story the same way, that there was a heavy cut cloth on the table that was just beautiful, and lovely china and flatware, and that Mrs. Sadler used real crystal, and everything was always just perfection. And so the minister was there, and Captain Sadler was home, and little Pearl, and you all probably know where this is going. That bird had been there for several weeks and hadn't been any trouble, but that day in front of the minister, at lunch, it let loose with just terrible cursing. And Mrs. Sadler got so flustered and so mad that she picked up, it's always the same story, the heavy lead water pitcher that was full of water, and she threw it on the bird in the cage, and the bird said, "Man overboard, man overboard." They swore it was true. And Zeb knew about this story too, and he confirmed it. True story. Well, later years, there was another bird story that involved Golden and this time and Pearl. And this happened at church, and I was there. It was in the 60s. And you know, I've told you all that my Aunt Golden was a milliner in her youth and made hats, and she took a lot of pride in her skills. But as she got older, she didn't make her own hats anymore. Sometimes she would adjust something because she had an idea of a little change she wanted to make, because she always liked to be a little different. But she bought her hats when she bought hats for the store, and this one particular hat was a pheasant with a flowing feather. It was very, very distinctive and stood out. And in those days, the choir did not wear robes. The choir at Old Baptist had a metal pipe rod in front of the choir area, and it had a red velvet, a burgundy velvet curtain on it. And nowadays it's a nice wooden area, but back then it was cordoned off with this velvet curtain. And the ladies and gentlemen would be dressed in their Sunday finery in the choir, and that's just how it was. Well, this particular Sunday they come in, and Golden realizes that she and Miss Pearl have on the same hat. And Miss Pearl, I believe she'd been maybe to Norfolk and purchased her hat. And then there was a third hat in the audience, and I can't remember for sure who that was, but I believe it was Suzanne Maline's mother, Miss Hazel Dillihay, the same bird with the same feather. So after the processional and everybody bent their head for the opening prayer, Golden went down deep behind that curtain, and she yanked off that bird, and somebody could kind of see the curtain moving around a little bit. And when she popped back up in the prayer, when they said amen, the bird was gone. So she and Mr. Zeb they'd sit there and they'd laugh about that. There was 2 hats that were alike in church then, but the third one, it had been remodeled in a matter of 30 seconds. So that's just a little hello today. I hope you're having a good day. The sun's out, and I'm got real shoes on, so it's a good day. Bye.